Hey guys, and welcome to my first weekly wrap-up for March 2016. To be clear, I am still late on doing wrap-ups and stuff, so this is not for like the week that we are currently in, but for this past week, which I consider to have ended March 5th, which was Saturday, March 5th. So this is everything that I read from February 27th to Saturday, March 5th. There's 4 things that I finished, and I'll just jump right into them. First one is The Shining Girls by Lauren Bucas. This book, I had a lot of high hopes for this book. It sounds super interesting. It has a really, really interesting premise, a really interesting idea. Basically, it's about this guy named Harper, who somehow, inexplicably, comes across this house that allows him to travel through time and allows him to kind of sense these girls throughout time called the Shining Girls, who he says that they have this thing called the Shine. And what does he do with this lovely house and this gift of seeing shining girls? He goes off and kills them. He's a time-traveling serial killer, and I feel like that is such an interesting idea, especially the implications of possibly a detective or someone who knows about this or is like noticing clues about this. Kind of this really great dynamic with Harper and the things that he's doing all throughout these time periods and stuff, all throughout these different time periods that he goes to, very specific time periods that he goes to watch these girls as they live their lives and to eventually prey on them and attack them. So I think something that this book does well is I like the writing. I like the writing a lot, actually. I like her style of writing. I think it does have some good suspenseful moments, some good thriller-esque moments, but it doesn't really push as hard as it could, which I think mostly comes from a slightly disappointing execution for some of the premise. For example, it's never really explained, even a little bit, why Harper is doing what he's doing. I mean, he seems to like killing, which is very evident from the get-go, but it's not entirely clear why that is or what his exact motivation is for killing these specific girls. Why does he go after these girls who shine, quote-unquote shine? Why does he need to do this? Why does he need to travel through time and do this? Why does he need to find these specific girls in these specific moments in time and do this to them? It's never really explained or given a reason, and there's no real motivation behind it, which is kind of disappointing. But I mean, I don't necessarily feel like that could detract from someone's enjoyment of this story overall. There is a bit of suspense, though, each time that Harper kind of hones in on a specific girl and what he does in order to like prey on them, in order to get involved in their life, and just when and where he ends up making his move into their life. So a lot of this book is taken up not just by Harper, but by this girl named Kirby, who is one of his victims, one of the people that he tries to prey on, but she is able to come out of it alive, and she's left with this scar across her neck. And she's kind of like famous for it. People know who she is because of it, and she hates that. She really, really wants to figure out who's done this to her, because she feels like she knows a pattern since the time that this has happened of other people that stuff like this has happened to. She feels like she notices that this could possibly be the work of a serial killer. I mean, obviously the first thought that comes to her mind is not time-traveling serial killer who uses this house to go after shining girls, but she does have some sort of tiny inclination that something might be going on that people just aren't aware of, and that the person who attacked her might not just have been a one-off thing. So she kind of goes to this guy who used to be a crime reporter but is now a sports reporter, and he's kind of just through with being a crime reporter. He's done with it. He's the one who actually covered the case on Kirby when she was younger and when this happened to her, and now he's retired from being a crime reporter, and now he just wants to be a sports reporter and just not deal with it anymore. But then Kirby comes along and tries to be his intern, and he's pretty bitter about it, and it really doesn't take well to her, and the fact that she wants to dig this stuff up and even give a suggestion that this might be a serial killer kind of thing. So overall, I feel like Kirby and possibly this reporter are really the only 2 characters that I feel that much of a connection with. All the other characters that are victims in this book, all the other people in this book, I don't really feel that much towards, including Harper, because his motivation is just so hard to understand, and I just don't see why he's doing what he's doing. If we're seeing into his mind, which we're seeing through his mind a lot, we're seeing through his thoughts a lot, we should at least get some sort of inclination of why he's doing what he's doing and what the point of all of it is and why he's doing it in this very specific way that he's doing it. Because he is doing it in a very specific way, and it just doesn't really make any sense. Overall, I did give this book around a 3 to 3.5, mostly because of the writing, that I did enjoy it. I did find enjoyment of reading this, but it was not quite as good as I thought it would be. It's not quite as good of an execution as I would have liked it to be, and it sort of fell flat in some places, but at the same time, it was kind of fun to read, and I do think there will be some people who like this. I think the overall vibe of Harper that I was getting kind of reminds me of The Killer from Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King. I feel like the detective side of things, like the investigation side of things, and then the murderer side of things, both really gave me this kind of vibe of Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King. Although this does have time travel in it, but that's another thing. I feel like the time travel aspect was just not utilized as much as it should have been, which is really disappointing because that is such an interesting idea, a time-traveling serial killer. And I feel like you could take that out of this book and it wouldn't really take anything away. It seems like kind of an afterthought that this is a time travel story, whereas I feel like that should be way more played up and should be way more in the foreground and should be more focused on for the reasoning. There should be more explanation to that and why it's a thing in this and why it's even there. Because as it is, if it was taken out, I don't know that this book would be much different. So the next 3 things that I read last week were actually from the same series, the series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. I read books 4, 5, and 6, which are, let's see if I can remember this, The Miserable Mill, The Austere Academy, and The Urset's Elevator, right? So I didn't really like The Miserable Mill that much. I'm not going to talk too much about each of these individually, but I didn't really like Miserable Mill that much. I think it was a really interesting idea. I think it mixed things up quite a bit from the last 3, just because they were kind of thrown into a different situation than they have been so far. But I just feel like it wasn't as interesting regardless of that premise. It kind of fell flat. The characters weren't that great. I just didn't find it to be quite as interesting as, say, The Reptile Room. I think it was about on the same level as The Wide Window. I think The Wide Window and this one were just kind of meh for me. But then The Austere Academy was a little bit better. I did really like that one a lot. I think it was definitely a step up. It was definitely an improvement. I liked the setting a lot. The characters were perfectly despicable and difficult to deal with and difficult to listen to, and I think that's kind of the point, and I like the writing a lot in this one. And then the Urset's Elevator, I also really like the writing in a lot. I think the humor, especially in the Urset's Elevator, is pretty on point and pretty great. I think that one is tied for my favorite with The Reptile Room so far. I don't think it quite mixed things up very much in the actual story, but like the plot towards the end, especially of that one, I feel like it kind of threw in some new things into it, and possibly is giving the next few books in the series, hopefully, more of an interesting dynamic than has been in the previous books. So far they've all been very, very similar, and the end of this one just kind of threw in some new things, which I really enjoyed and really hope to see more of in the future of the series. I'm going to keep reading. I have the Violet Village checked on overdrive right now that I still have to listen to, and hopefully I can get to that very soon. And then the last thing that I listened to this week was a book called The Man with the Getaway Face by Richard Stark, which is actually a pseudonym for Donald E. Westlake. And this is the second book in the Parker series by Richard Stark. The first being The Hunter, which I read last year. And this series follows this ruthless, kind of messed up, kind of diabolical anti-hero character who is basically a criminal. And in the first book, it basically follows him. He's been left for dead and just betrayed by both his wife and one of his partners in his heist crew. So they have left him for dead. They think he's dead, and using that, he kind of stays in the shadows while he attempts to stalk them down and take his revenge on them. Got a lot of really creepy vibes to it. His thought processes are something to behold, and I really enjoyed it a lot. It kind of reminds me of, I mean, I can't really help but make this comparison, but like the kind of mindset that Joe has in You and Hidden Bodies. It's like that kind of mindset, and it's really interesting, especially in the first one, seeing him go after these people in revenge. The second one is a little bit different. This whole series follows this Parker character, and in this one, at the very beginning, he's decided to get complete plastic surgery and change his face entirely so that anyone that may have known him before won't know who he is without him first letting them know who he is. So there's some people he lets like into the secret that he is who he is, but there's plenty of other people that he would very much like to keep that secret from. So this one is a little bit more of a like simple crime heisting novel, which I did like. I think I gave this one about 3 stars. In comparison to the first one, I think I gave 3.5 or 4 stars. I really like these a lot, regardless of them being fairly straightforward and fairly simple, at least the first 2 so far. Mostly just because of Parker as a character. He just gives me, I gotta go back to it, the same kind of feelings that like Joe gives me in Carolyn Kepnes's books. Just that really creepy crawly, really hard to read feeling, but like I'm so compelled I need to keep reading and to see like what he's going to do next, what he's going to think next, and what he's going to rationalize in himself next to do the things that he's going to do. Like super suspenseful, especially a lot of the time. There's a lot of great things going on, and if you think any of that sounds interesting, you should really check the series out. It's a pretty old series, and there's a lot of books in the series, and I have the third book on overdrive right now that I'm hoping to listen to this week. Anyway, that's everything that I finished, and then I also was able to finally finish Arrows of the Queen by Mercedes Lackey, but I didn't finish it enough in time to like put in this. I'll put that in the next week's wrap up. I have started reading Fin Fancy Necromancy by Randy Henderson. I like it so far. It's really good. The writing is sort of hit or miss sometimes, but the story is really interesting. The premise is pretty interesting. It's about this guy who was like framed for doing some dark necromancy when he was pretty young, and then sentenced to live outside of his body for a pretty long time, and this is kind of like black abyss place where he has to constantly relive his memories as a kind of torture, and then his real life body on Earth is being controlled by this other thing, and then we meet him on the day he's supposed to be released and put back into his new body, and some things happen. And so it's kind of like, it becomes a bit of a sort of mystery, but it's got a lot of funny elements to it. It's very much trying to be a humorous book, and I don't mean to give it that qualification like it's trying to be, but sometimes it's hit or miss. I have found some things in this to be funny, so I'm really looking forward to continuing with it. I've also started reading Dies the Fire by S.M. Sterling. I haven't gotten very far into it. That one I kind of keep here and read here, and this one it's really easy for me to take mass market paperbacks to work with me, so this is what I've been taking to work with me. I've also started reading Dies the Fire by S.M. Sterling. I haven't gotten very far into it. That one I kind of keep here and read here, and this one it's really easy for me to take mass market paperbacks to work with me. So this is what I'm going to be taking to work with me from now on until I finish it, I guess. And probably reading here a little bit also. So if you haven't seen last week's wrap-up video, I started this thing where I'm going to kind of read comments from my last wrap-up in this week's wrap-up. I did that in my last video. I think it went pretty well. I'm going to try to do that again this time. Just going to read off some of the comments and reply to them here instead of replying to them through text in the comment section. So Melody said that Hidden Bodies is so twisted, just like the first one, that they are just so different from what she's used to reading, that they're crazy, and that morally the books are so wrong, but it somehow makes sense, and I would totally agree with that. It's kind of like you don't want to witness these things happening necessarily, but you understand this character because of how well he's explaining himself. He's very much explaining himself very well and why he's doing the things. He's very logical of why he's doing the specific things he does, and he kind of works it out for you, why he's doing the things he does, and then you just kind of go along with it because you're like, oh, that kind of makes sense, but at the same time, holy crap, what is wrong with you? Like, I hate Joe. He's a despicable person, but at the same time, it's so difficult not to read from his perspective and see what he's going to do next. And then Jen from Today in Jen's Library just said some stuff about Queen of the Tearling. She first mentioned Catherine Kelgan's narration, which I don't remember if I mentioned in my actual video, is crazy. It's kind of over the top, and I remember we were supposed to be buddy reading this, and Michael from Bitten by a Radioactive Book started listening to this book, Queen of the Tearling, and just could not go on past like the first chapter because he hated Catherine Kelgan's narration and how ridiculously into it she is. I guess she very much gets in character for everything and gets a little bit over dramatic at times. And sometimes it's hard to tell whether you're like enjoying the story, you're like feeling really tense because of the story and the writing, or if it's just Catherine Kelgan is making you crazy because of how intensely she's reading the story. And then she also mentioned the narrator for You and like Hidden Bodies, and whether she might like it or not. Not just narration, but like the whole thing in general. And I would generally say give it a shot. If you are going to read these books, obviously listen to them, because the narrator for those books is just literally the perfect narrator that they could possibly have found, because he does it so well. It's kind of insane how well he does the creepiness of the Joe character. And then Joe from Final Blow Joe just mentioned that it was really weird hearing me say the name Joe so many times in my last video. Not just because I mentioned him in like the comments, the last week's comment section of the video, but because of how many times I said Joe because of Hidden Bodies. That must be really weird. I'm so sorry, Joe, that Joe happens to have the same name as you. I'm just gonna see how many times I can say Joe in this video, Joe. Sorry, Joe. Thanks for the comment, Joe. Joe says that doing comments to videos inside the actual video itself is a little bit odd, but fun. And I agree. And then Connor just said that he wasn't sure where to start with Mercedes Lackey, and I would definitely say now that I finished this, I think I should have a review up of this by now, Arrows of the Queen, This is actually the first book that she ever wrote, and the first book in this like kind of long series, the Valdemar series, and this is definitely a great place to start, I think. So go watch that review if you aren't sure though, because I feel like I did a pretty good job of explaining what it's about and like how it begins and how it's a good place to start and everything. And then Alexandra Bowden just went on this great little rant about how much she hates Queen of the Tearling, which is perfectly fine with me. I didn't love it or anything. I think a lot of my liking for it was mostly just the ending part of it. I think I just came to respect it a little bit more as it went on, and then the ending just kind of surprised me. And just going into it not really knowing anything about it whatsoever, just kind of hearing the name of it, I had no idea what this book was about at all. So going into it, I kind of liked it more than I thought I would. So it's all good. And then Starstruck Q says that she agrees with me on Uncle Monty and what happens to Uncle Monty in the reptile room and a series of unfortunate events. And yes, very sad. Miriam from Between Lines of Life says she's excited to read The Queen of Tearling, and that she really likes the concept of doing answering video comments in the video, which makes me happy. I'm glad someone's into the idea. And then Mose Reed's giving me this really great recommendation for a book called Tea with the Black Dragon, which is a mystery fantasy novel influenced by Chinese mythology. And yes, and she just says that she remembers me asking for kind of like fantasy mystery kind of things, and that's very helpful. I'm going to go ahead and look that up, and hopefully I can get to it because that sounds really cool. Thanks so much for the recommendation. And then Simply Dream said a few things, but I want to just comment on them. Said they read the first 4 series of Unfortunate Event books and just had to put it down because they didn't really like it very much. I kind of see why, because it's not the best thing I've ever read. I feel like I was expecting something a little bit more because of how much it's talked about and how much it's loved, but at the same time it is really funny, it is really clever, and it's really dark, and it's pretty different. Not each book from each other, because all the books are pretty much the same, which kind of bothers me a little bit. But I feel like as a series as a whole, they're kind of the first of its kind thing. I think it might have bred a pretty interesting generation of readers that may not have found dark humor to be as funny as they do. And Ryan says that the series of Unfortunate Events does eventually have some really cool twists and turns and stuff, but it kind of suggests not to listen to them all back to back. And I think after I listen to The Vile Village, I might give it a break for a little while before I start listening to them again. Because yeah, I am kind of getting a little bit overloaded with them. I think they're all just kind of blending in with one another now, and it's hard to distinguish one from each other, especially because I listened to all 3 of the ones that I listened to last week in the same day. So possibly I'm getting overloaded and should give it a little bit of a break. Anyway, that's all for this video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Once again, if you've read anything that I talked about, if you're interested in anything that I talked about, please let me know. I'd love to hear it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later with more.